Because as I mentioned earlier, Patanjali's text is not exactly in chronological order. His first chapter deals with the perfect concentration, the highest concentration. That's called Samadhi Pada. I mean the chapter that deals with Samadhi, which is the way to complete liberation. His next chapter, the second chapter, deals with different disciplines, different means, different methods to attain fitness, complete fitness to practice this Samadhi, to attain this Samadhi. His third chapter deals with some of the supernatural faculties that we may obtain by practicing yoga. And his last chapter deals, of course, with the last stage of yoga, that is liberation. So, when we discuss Samadhi, we must remember this Samadhi or perfect concentration is the last of the 8 steps in yoga. Yoga has got 8 steps. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. These are the 8 steps, 8-fold path. Of this, Samadhi is the last one. It is in his second chapter that he elaborately discusses the means, the different steps towards achieving the highest degree of fitness to practice fixing the mind, then meditation, then Samadhi, concentration. If you look at these 8 steps, you find the last 3 steps constitute one single whole. It's called Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, 3 together. When I explain this, we will understand. Dharana means the ability to fix our mind on something. Dhyana is meditation, which means the ability to fix our mind on something for a long time. Samadhi is the last step, when we achieve perfect, complete concentration, which leads to liberation. When we attain this highest Samadhi, which will be called in the coming sutras, we will discuss Asamprajnata Samadhi, which is the last stage, where there is no object of concentration, where we concentrate on our own inner essence. All objects vanish when concentration reaches the highest stage, which is the last stage of Samadhi. Samadhi has 2 stages, Samprajnata, where there is an object of concentration, Asamprajnata, where there is no object, where you go beyond prajna. Going beyond prajna means going beyond even the idea that I exist. That's highest state. Now, and this highest Samadhi is the means for liberation. Now, before coming to that, I will deal with the steps, the means, which Patanjali explains in the second chapter of his Yoga Sutra text. So, those of you who have got the text with you can refer to the 29th Sutra of second chapter. The highest Asamprajnata Samadhi that we mention now is discussed in the 18th Sutra of first chapter. But the means are described in the second chapter, and it begins on 29th sutra of second chapter. I already referred to this Yama, Niyama, etc. Now those of you who got the text can refer to the 29th verse of second chapter. It's called Sadhana Pada in the Sanskrit. Sadhana means the means, the instruments, the methods. Here in the 29th sutra, Patanjali gives the whole list of the 8 steps of yoga. It's called Ashtanga Yoga. It's called Raja Yoga. Before taking up the subjects, again I want you to keep in mind the whole picture of what we discussed so far. That will help us to understand Patanjali's system better. First, we must remember that Patanjali defines yoga as cessation of or stopping of our misidentification with different sense objects, stopping or cessation of identifying ourselves with the modifications that arise out of our experience interaction with different objects. When we see an object, we identify ourselves as the one who sees that object. And when we have a painful experience, we identify ourselves as the one, as an entity that experiences that painful experience, that goes through that painful experience, so we suffer pain. The modifications that emerge out of our sense contact is superimposed upon our personality. As a result, we become anxious, we suffer from anxiety neurosis, depression, happiness, unhappiness, tension, stress, and so on. When we stop this misidentification with these modifications that emerge out of sense contact or sense experiences, then that is the goal of yoga. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Now, how do these modifications arise? That should be kept in mind before coming to the subjects. As I mentioned earlier, whatever we do, whatever we experience, mentally, physically, or psychologically, will create a wave in the mind stuff. It's called vritti or modification. We can never do anything without this vritti or modification emerging in the mind system. A flash of thought, a glance at a picture, a glimpse of an object, or the idea that emerges in our mind when we hear something. See, when suppose we sit here, we happen to hear the siren, the voice that coming, the noise that coming from a passing vehicle. Immediately you find, because of our association with the vehicles, we know that this noise is coming from that vehicle. So you will immediately visualize mentally seeing that vehicle. And then all these remain in the form of modifications or vrittis in the mind stuff. Also whatever we do consciously will create a vritti. This vritti or modification becomes a tendency. Modification is in a way grows. When many modifications coming together, many vrittis, waves related to an identical or similar experience get accumulated in the mind stuff, it becomes what is called in Sanskrit samskara or a tendency. Samskara has the potency of repetition. Whatever becomes a samskara will go deeper into the mind stuff. That's why if we have the samskaras within our mind stuff, then when we interact with an identical or similar object outside, this samskara will re-emerge in the mind and we mentally connect with that experience. If the samskaras did not exist in the mind stuff, then external objects will not be able to influence us. Many things when we pass in the street, move in the street, if you see an object, you go on looking at that object. It means there is an identical samskara, which is called a tendency, potency, that is accumulated in the mind stuff, in a personality. And when a parallel or a similar visual object emerges, eyes go towards that and mind also goes towards that. If the samskara did not exist in the mind stuff, eyes may go, but mind will not go. If mind and eyes do not go together, then there will be no experience. One may sit somewhere staring with eyes, both the eyes open. If the mind is somewhere else, we won't be seeing, though we will be looking. If our mind and ears do not come together, they do not cooperate, they function together, then you won't come to know of an object that produces a noise. So, this mind suddenly projects a pre-experienced tendency or samskara forward, and then we naturally get focused on that object. So you have to remember action, modification, tendency. Now, when a number of tendencies and potencies get accumulated, become intense, then what happens? It becomes what is called in Sanskrit a Vasana. Vasana is nothing but a tendency or a potency which is action oriented. We will have a Vasana to do something means we will have a tendency, a strong tendency towards doing something or towards not doing something. Remember, so far as the creation or modification is concerned, psychologically speaking, action and non-inaction are the same. See, suppose, well, I will not do that. That strong will, I will not do that, also creates a tendency, negative. As much as the will that says, I will do that. Because we call it raga and dvesha, aversion and attachment. Aversion also is related to tendency. So remember, action that leads to modification, that becomes samskara or tendency or potency, that becomes vasana. What is vasana? Vasana is nothing but a samskara or a tendency or potency which is action oriented. So as I said last time, if you find in some families, musicians for example, your small children will show a special genius, an aptitude to learn music. Not necessarily, but in many cases it happens. So what does it mean? In Sanskrit it's called, they have a vasana, means a strong tendency to practice music. It may be accumulated through environmental, acquired or inherited tendencies, whatever may be. This vasana becomes, but in Sanskrit is called, it's called Sankalpa, means a will. I will do that. And that will produces action. Action again produces modification. Modification produces tendency. Tendency produces, this vasana is called action-oriented tendency. Again it leads to will to repeat action. Action again produces tendency. Like that it goes in cycles. In fact, the whole human personality is nothing but a kind of movement through this cycle. What is yoga trying to do is to stop this process of moving along the wheel. If you go on moving along the wheel, there is no way to come out. Because the wheel has no beginning and no end. Wheel never begins anywhere. A cycle never begins anywhere. It never ends anywhere. So, in fact, this is what Buddha also taught in his Pali canonical literature. You find Sutta Pitaka and Abhidhamma Pitaka and Vinaya Pitaka. The three canonical literature of Buddhism in the Pali language. You find Buddha speaks of 4 sorrows, grief, and he speaks of a way to come out of this sorrow. The sorrow we experience by going through this cycle which Buddhists call samsara, the wheel. Not Buddhist tradition called samsara, which is created by Trishna or desire. And like that there is a 12 link chain of wheel, and we move in cycles. Yoga is nothing but an attempt to come out of this wheel. Now what are the disciplines that we are coming to this now? So, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. These are the 8 disciplines. Of which 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th constitute one unit. 6th, 7th and 8th constitute another unit. First is Yama. I have given some elementary explanation of these disciplines at the time when we took up this yoga for the first time, the first few classes. Yama is a group of 5 fundamental disciplines which are universal in nature. So sometimes called Sarvabhauma, Vrita, and Patanjali's languages, these are all universal ethical principles. First is Yama. That's what Patanjali says. The first step to enter Yama, yoga. Not only yoga, any kind of spiritual discipline. The first step is to practice these 5 disciplines, which are together called Yama. Of these, the first one is non-injury, non-violence. Non-violence doesn't mean physical non-violence, not abstinence from violent actions, but also violent tendencies. What the psychological insight of Patanjali is revealed in the commentaries. But the commentators like Vijnana Bhikshu and others make it an interesting point. They say violent activity and violent thought are equally violent from the yogi point of view. Because just physically avoiding an injury or doing harm to another person is not enough. If you have a tendency in our mind, but it's called Samskara as I mentioned earlier, or Vritti, modification I mentioned earlier. If there is the slightest violent or harmful tendency, even a flash of thought in our mind, that also can be a great obstacle in the practice of yoga. So, non-injury is the first one. Practice of non-injury or non-violence, mentally, verbally, physically, intellectually, in all respects. We have to remember, and that's a technical point to remember, Ahimsa is the term used here, non-violence. Here, this discipline is essentially an individual discipline. It is not a national philosophy. So sometimes, very often, when we discuss Gandhian non-violence, or the philosophy of non-violence of Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, all the great world leaders who insisted on these great ideas. They all evolved this yoga ideal into a national philosophy for the whole world. That is a great thing they did. But in Patanjali system, it is described as an individual spiritual discipline. That's why Patanjali says, not only avoiding violent action, but avoiding even a tendency, a thought related to violence is necessary to step into yoga. So that's a very significant point. When we use Sanskrit text, you come across the word Ahimsa. Sometimes we are not familiar with this, we may misunderstand. Ahimsa here means a spiritual discipline that we should all follow individually in our internal and external life. Because if you interpret it as a philosophy for a nation, then you cannot think of internal discipline. So individual spiritual discipline, Ahimsa. The second discipline that Patanjali speaks about is Satya, means truthfulness. Truthfulness, truth can have different interpretations. Truthfulness, in the true sense of the term, goes along with non-violence. Well, there is a verse in one of our lawgivers, Manu, it's called Manu Smriti. It's a constitution that was written by a lawgiver, ancient Hindu lawgiver, around 6th or 7th century BC. According to many others, it was even more, it is of greater antiquity. So here he says, truth. See, suppose you see a man with some difficulty in walking. Oh, how are you, lame man? You call him lame? Or a man who is half here, you call you a deaf man. It's truth, of course. You are not telling the untruth. So, something very interesting. So, the practice of truthfulness should be related, should be associated with the practice of non-violence. If you call a man, you are a dead man, it is really violence. You are injuring him mentally. So there is a verse in Manu, Satyam bruyat, priyam bruyat, na bruyat satyam priyam, priyam cha anadam bruyat, esha dharma sanatana. It's a very interesting definition of real truth. You should speak the truth, but that truth should be appropriate. It should not be unpleasant, it should be pleasant. A truth, when we speak a truth, that should not be a cutthroat truth. As I said earlier, a blind man, there may be some people may have some difficulty in the eyes formation, looking. There are very wonderful epithets people may use, invectives that people can find to call such a person without deviating from truth. But that will not be real truth. Because real truth should be conducive to the ideal of ahimsa, of non-violence or non-injury. So this lawgiver says, tell the truth, satyam bruyat, priyam bruyat, but that truth should be said in a way without injuring another person. And if there is a truth which is, by telling that truth, you are not doing any good to anybody, either to the person about whom you are telling the truth or to yourself. So why should you tell that truth? Or if a person may be slightly tight-fisted, So there are many terms you used to call him, but it's not appropriate. So that's why all these 5 disciplines go together. That's an intricate ethical system that Patanjali puts forward. It should be truth, but that truth should not violate the principles of the earlier discipline, which is non-violence. And you should never speak a truth if by telling the truth you are doing injury to another person. Which means real truth should be should go along with the ideal of non-violence. It should not be harmful to anybody. That's the idea behind it. So the second discipline is Satya. Now one may ask the question, why should we practice all these disciplines before we take up yoga? I mentioned this, I explained this on a few occasions till now. Of course, I was not referring to the Ashtanga Yoga at that time, but I mentioned many times, I'm just repeating briefly now, without being established in these disciplines. If anybody takes up intensive practice of even physical yoga, it could do a lot of harm to that person. As I said earlier, breathing exercises and physical yoga will produce a lot of energy and heat and enthusiasm in the body, because nervous system get activated, body becomes light, so you naturally feel more active and energetic. And at the same time, if we are not fully established in these fundamental ethical disciplines, it can do a great harm. A person with violent tendency, if he or she practices breathing exercise, it's called pranayama is mentioned here, or asana, yogic exercises, it could create problem. Because whatever is our natural tendency will get aggravated, will become hyperactive when we practice pranayama, concentration, or yoga. Therefore, non-violence is the first discipline and truthfulness is the second discipline. The third discipline is Asteya, which literally means non-stealing or abstinence from theft. I mean, a tendency to avoid doing something which is wrong. So, the Asteya literally means non-stealing, but in a broader sense it should mean not having a desire for anything which doesn't belong to us. And it is related to another great quality which is described in the second, that is Niyama, the second class of disciplines, that is Aparigraha. So, it's very important that one should be established in non-violence, truthfulness, and again, that's going to be discussed in the second mantra, the second group of disciplines known as Niyama, that is Santosha. You find in the 31st Sutra, Patanjali speaks about Niyamas. These Niyamas are relative disciplines. Shauja, Santosha, Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana. Shauja is purity, cleanliness, internal and external, mental and physical. But contentment is mentioned there in the 32nd Sutra, when Patanjali gives the list of disciplines which are together called Niyamas. Contentment is important. Now, when we are fully contented with what we have, then we won't have any desire to do injury to another person. And we won't have a tendency to have a desire for something that does not belong to us. And then, naturally, we won't feel the need to deviate from the path of truth. So contentment is mentioned in the 32nd Sutra that we are going to discuss. So Asteya, Brahmacharya. Brahmacharya is difficult to explain in the common parlance, but I should mention it literally means continence, leading a pure life, preserving the vital energy of the mental and physical system, which is essential for mental peace, psychological and physiological health. So that's why in ancient times, in many texts related to yoga philosophy, the great sages recommended the practice of discipline even for householders. I mean, apart from their household duties and responsibilities, they should lead pure life. According to some of the ancient lawgivers, may appear to be somewhat old-fashioned and antique from our point of view, but it's very significant. In ancient times, householders, when they reach old age, when they can be sure that their lineage will be preserved, when they see the face of grandson or granddaughter, and when they find their hair is getting grey and cheeks are getting wrinkled, they should take to a forest hermitage and spend the rest of their lifetime in contemplation and meditation. It's called Vanaprastha. So Manu, the same lawgiver, says, Grihastasya yadapasye vali palidam atmanaga apatyasya apatyam tadaranyam samasya. An ancient recommendation given by Manu, the lawgiver. Those who are leading householders' life, when they reach a particular age, when they make sure they have made everything ready for their whole family, there is no obligation. When they have seen the face of apatyasya apatyam, when the grandparents could see the face of granddaughter and grandson, they can be sure the family lineage will be preserved. Then the grandmother and granddaughter should not continue visiting beauty parlors and whitening their teeth or blackening their hair, trying to reverse the evolution of human mechanism. Instead of that, they should take to a forest hermitage and spend the rest of their time in meditation, contemplation. That's the idea behind. So this idea had a great significance for all times. All great intellectual, spiritual achievements were made by people who at one stage say goodbye to their biological drives and went beyond that and thought of higher transcendental values. In science, in art, in literature, in everything. This is the story. So, a great message is given here in the 30th verse. But remember, there is a special reason why Patanjali mentions this here. That's very important. And that is a great significance. The point is, as I mentioned earlier, when we take to yoga, we are entering a new area where our inner potentialities will start manifesting more and more. Whatever natural tendencies we have, those tendencies, those faculties, creativity, all will be intensified, multiplied. That's why yoga is sometimes employed for improving creativity of writers, thinkers, poets and poets, because practice of pranayama and asana will, as I said earlier, will activate psychological system, activate nervous system. So you will become more active, and as the nerve centers become, when they wake up, when they are awakened, new and higher faculties will develop. Second reason that Patanjali insists is this: the energy and heat and creativity and power that power of mind, as I said, psychological faculties that are associated with the practice of yoga should become the fuel to take us all the way to the 8th stage, that is samadhi. And we should remember, yama is the first stage, samadhi is the last stage. Samadhi is the goal, yama is the first step of the ladder. Yama and niyama should be practiced before you start practicing asana, pranayama, pratyahara, etc. Dharana, dhyana, etc. Why? Because asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Asana means your postures. Pranayama could mean breathing exercises. Dharana could mean ability to fix your mind on something. Pratyahara means withdrawing mind from external things. All this will naturally increase our inner faculties, mental faculties, intellectual faculties. So this increase of intellectual, mental and physical faculties should be done with great caution. If a naturally violent man tries to practice all this, you know what happens? He will become ultra-violent. He will become a great criminal. If a person who has not controlled his mind, has not reached some level of mental purity, if he suddenly awakens his nerve centers and nervous system, what happens? I don't want to name anybody, but if you read the history of yoga, those who talked about spirituality, right? There are a few unfortunate cases which I won't mention, but all because they started the practice of asana, pranayama, pratyahara before they were fully establishing yama and niyama. That's a very important thing to understand. Because mind will take you in the opposite direction. Yama and niyama gives you the fuel that moves the engine forward till you reach samadhi stage, till you get liberation. But the same fuel can take you in the wrong direction, can take you to a precipice. And this has happened in the case of a few unfortunate instances, which I don't want to mention. So that's why Patanjali makes it very clear. One should practice non-violence, truthfulness, abstinence from theft, non-stealing, and spiritual discipline, continence. Plus, last one is non-covetousness, Aparigraha. Really means not having a desire to accept things from others. That is again related to the absence of greed, which is again related to the third discipline, Asteya, which again is related to the higher principle, ethical principle, means contentment. You find this mentioned in the 32nd Sutra, Sauja Santosha. Santosha is a state, it's a mental state where you feel that you have got something beyond which there is nothing to seek. It's a great experience. The ultimate, highest contentment comes only at the last state. But its various shades, various stages in the path of contentment could be experienced if we practice these disciplines. So contentment is a great virtue. We feel that, well, we have got something. There is nothing more to seek. And we feel perfect harmony with Him, harmony with ours. So, Patanjali speaks of these 5 fundamental disciplines. And he says, Ete jati desha kala samaya anavachinna sarvahuma mahavratam. These are great, grand disciplines, values, he says, which are universal in nature, which are applicable and relevant for all people, in all traditions, in all cultures. These disciplines are not confined to the path of yoga. These disciplines are to be practiced stage by stage. Because many of these disciplines, if we can practice to some extent, even if you make an attempt to practice any of these disciplines, you will feel slowly we become more and more peaceful within, and our inner life and outer life, our interaction with the rest of the world, with other people also becomes more and more peaceful. That's why he makes a grand statement in the next sutra. All these disciplines, they are relevant for all times. They are universal, ethical, moral, spiritual values. They are not confined to any particular group, nation, religion or anything. They are universal, ethical values. He makes that point very clear. In the next sutra, 32nd sutra, he speaks of 5 disciplines which together are called niyamas. That is the second stage in the 8-limb path of yoga. The 8th one is samadhi, which we discussed in the previous chapter, first chapter. If you remember, Samprajnata Samadhi and Asamprajnata Samadhi. So, the second discipline is niyama that we will discuss in the next class. And before I conclude, I want to make this announcement. This is the last class before the winter recess. The next class after the winter recess will be on Friday, January the 23rd, 2015. So please remember, this is the last class before the winter recess begins. The next class will be on Friday, January the 23rd, 2015. Now we will have 10 minutes interaction or discussion on any subject that you may feel like discussing.
So Swami, Patanjali recommends we practice Ahimsa, Satya. Now, but I mean, where are we to get our strength to practice that? I mean, for instance, is not meditation one of the sources of strength to practice that? I mean, do you wait to meditation till you cannot wait to meditation till you're perfect?
Yes, that's true. Now, so in all these disciplines, there are 2 stages that will become clear as we progress in this class. At the first stage, we make attempt to practice these disciplines. The second stage, we get fully established in all these disciplines. At the later stage, they become more natural characteristics. At the beginning, we are trying to practice them. As we try to practice them, we find we already start practicing. The complete perfection in all these disciplines is possible only when we reach samadhi state. But it doesn't mean that we cannot begin. That's why in all these great disciplines, description of different features of yoga and Vedanta, there are 2 dimensions. In the beginning, we must look upon them as goals to be achieved and try to practice. But you find 100% perfection in Ahimsa, Satya, all this is possible only when we reach higher samadhi level. When they become our natural characteristics. So that's the idea behind.
So, but in that course, I mean, as you start to practice and you have a goal, at that point are you starting meditation?
Yes, at that time one may read, one can start meditation, one can contemplate. Of course, at that stage meditation will not become real meditation as defined and explained in the text, but it will be some kind of contemplation, thinking and all that. That's why we do not wait till we get fully established on discipline number 1 to progress discipline number 2. You find at one stage when they are all interrelated. They all are interrelated. We might ask the question, then why should they be explained? different features and aspects of this discipline should be made clear. For that, they are categorized and divided into different groups and categories. Each one is related to Adhyatmika. For example, contentment. Without contentment, how can one practice truthfulness, non-stealing, non-receiving of gifts, etc.? All these. So you find all these are interrelated. And then when we become contented, when we start practicing non-injury, etc., when we become mentally pure, Sauja is called. So all are interrelated. So to begin with, when we read these books, we gradually feel, we develop a tendency, an aptitude towards these ideas, great ideas. And you find once we are convinced of their relevance, we will slowly try, we will be, naturally we will be drawn to start, you will have a beginning, you will start somewhere at one point. As I get it. That's why it's called hearing is important. It's something very interesting. Hearing means Sravanam. Hearing could mean listening, reading. I mean, at the grossest level, we become familiar with these ideas. That is a great thing. Immediately we may not start practice at full stream, but then gradually our mind gets drawn towards that, and then we slowly start practicing. Second point is, there is a special reason why I mentioned this. The practice of Hatha Yoga and physical exercise. This should be mentioned because pranayama can create problems like schizophrenia problems, the delusions of reference, delusions of persecution, and also asthma. Delusions and asthmatic problems are often associated with the practice of breathing exercise, including retention of breath within. Because suddenly you find when you retain the breath within, the nervous system gets activated. And mind also suddenly becomes hyperactive. And if one is not at least intellectually familiar with the need to practice these disciplines, he may face a danger. If you are familiar with these ideas, you are familiar with the need to practice these disciplines, then one can, oh yes, this is a problem, I should be careful. So that alertness will be very important. Delusions of persecution, delusions of reference, and delusions of grandeur. These three delusions, and asthma. Asthma is purely health oriented. That because when the matras, the measurement of retention and breathing in, breathing out, and retention within and without, antakumbha and bagikumbha is called. So if they are not properly guided or regulated, it could lead to asthmatic problems. That's one thing, if one practices for a long time. And another problem is it could lead to delusions of grandeur. You may suddenly start thinking you are Mahatma Gandhi or Julius Caesar, Jesus Christ. This is real danger. Or if people start talking, you feel that they are conspiring against you, delusions of persecution, reference, all this. That's why in one context it is said, in one I read, the Swami Shivanandaji, the founder of Divine Life Society, once warned against intense practice of pranayama and breathing exercises, and also some of the complicated postures when the yoga became popular, the early decades of 20th century. But later teachers, they didn't go very deep into this. Of course, they guided, so it was no problem. But it could lead to problems. Please remember, Patanjali's system is not a book on physical exercise. It is an entirely different science. For that, there are 3-4 fundamental books. Gheranda Samhita and Hatha Yoga Pratipika and Shiva Samhita. 3 famous books which deal with Hatha Yoga, physical exercise exclusively. The Patanjali doesn't directly deal with the system, but asana is one of the 8 angas, 8 limbs in the yoga system. So asana, pranayama mentioned one after another. So one should practice, or one should become aware of the need to practice yama niyama before practicing taking up pranayama, asana. That's the idea. Any other subject for discussion?
Swamiji, you mentioned sense objects creating vrittis or waves in the mind stuff. Other people's minds can also affect ours. In addition, I suppose maybe this is a sense object. How can we avoid negative vrittis or non-constructive vrittis from arising through our interaction with other individuals?
Yes, of course we cannot avoid interacting with people. So every moment, every day we deal with innumerable types of people. Not all of them transmitting positive, desirable vritti. So this is a real problem. So one method is we should become aware of the need to associate with good people. Now, associating with good people may not be always easy. You don't have a large number of great saints assembled in front of you. So one way to do this is to associate with great people through their great ideas. Swami Yatishwaranandaji was one of the senior monks who preached in this country and also Europe during the early decades of 20th century, before the start of the Second World War. So he was asked this question. So he mentioned one solution. We must develop a kind of internal mental filtering system. A filtering system, which means if we can develop a faculty, an inner faculty to discern, to avoid negative, undesirable modifications, influences, then their impact will be less. That's an idea. So we should become aware of this. And again, without worrying much about not associating with undesirable people, we must keep associating with good ideas, good thoughts, good ideas. You need not try to avoid running away towards east. You just move in the opposite direction. If you want to avoid the east, just move towards the west. If you want to avoid the west, move towards the east or any direction. So without worrying about the undesirable influences or vrittis, we must keep doing good things, thinking good ideas, and feeding our mind with more and more positive, desirable, healthy tendencies and modifications and vrittis. So that will naturally keep our mind immune to the influence of negative things. That's the idea. Any deliberate effort to avoid unnecessary influences is not going to work. But we must keep moving towards the west without bothering about avoiding moving towards the east. Keep moving in the positive direction. So feeding the mind with positive thoughts, positive ideas, through positive associations. If you can't get people, you can feed the mind with good ideas, reading, discussing, lecturing, contemplating, listening to things like that. That's right. So please remember, next class will be on Friday, January the 23rd, 7th. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Sri Ram Krishna Pramastu.